At my nephew's graduation party, my sister cornered me and said, "You're paying for his college. It's the least you can do since you never had kids." I agreed and set up a $50,000 education fund. 2 weeks later, I found out he dropped out to become a TikTok influencer. I transferred every penny back to my account and sent him a message: "Good luck monetizing your dance videos." I, 42M, never thought my sister would weaponize my childlessness against me, but here we are. The graduation party was supposed to be a celebration, but it turned into the most expensive lesson I've ever taught. The backyard was packed with relatives I barely recognized anymore. My nephew had just graduated high school, and everyone was buzzing about his future plans. I'd been nursing a beer by the fence, watching him pose for photos with his diploma, when my sister appeared beside me like a heat-seeking missile. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her voice carried that familiar edge of entitlement as she told me it was time I stepped up for my nephew's college education. The words hit me like a slap. She said it was the least I could do since I never had kids of my own to spend money on. Her tone suggested this wasn't a request, but an expectation, as if my lack of children somehow made me the family's designated ATM. The audacity stunned me silent for a moment. My sister had always been direct, but this felt different, calculated. She'd clearly been planning this ambush, waiting for the perfect moment when I'd be surrounded by family and social pressure. She continued, explaining how expensive college had become and how they'd been counting on family support. The way she said it made it sound like I'd already agreed to something I'd never even been asked about. I looked across the yard at my nephew, who was laughing with his friends, completely oblivious to the financial negotiations happening in his name. He was a good kid, or so I thought. Smart enough to graduate with decent grades, polite when he remembered to be, and he'd always seemed grateful for the birthday money I'd sent over the years. My sister pressed harder, mentioning specific numbers. 50,000 would cover most of his state school expenses, she said. She'd done her research, had spreadsheets ready on her phone showing tuition costs and living expenses. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment request. This was a full-scale campaign. The family dynamics at play were impossible to ignore. My parents were watching from across the yard, and I could feel the weight of their expectations. My sister had positioned this perfectly, knowing I'd look like the selfish uncle if I refused in front of everyone. She'd weaponized the family gathering, turning my nephew's achievement into leverage against me. But something in her approach bothered me beyond the obvious manipulation. There was an assumption that my money was somehow communal property, that my financial success obligated me to fund other people's dreams. She spoke as if my childlessness was a character flaw that needed correcting through financial generosity. I found myself agreeing before I'd fully processed the decision. Maybe it was the social pressure. Maybe it was genuine affection for my nephew. Or maybe I just wanted to end the conversation. I told her I'd set up an education fund and transfer the money within the week. The relief on her face was immediate and telling. She'd been more worried about my response than she'd let on. The rest of the party passed in a blur of congratulations and backslapping. My nephew hugged me with what seemed like genuine appreciation, telling me how much this meant to him and his future. He talked about his plans to study business, maybe get into marketing or communications. His enthusiasm felt real, and for a moment, I thought maybe my sister's aggressive approach had been justified by the outcome. That week, I set up the education fund exactly as promised. $50,000 transferred into a dedicated account with my nephew as the beneficiary. I even added a small buffer for unexpected expenses, bringing the total to $55,000. The bank representative walked me through the terms, explaining how the funds could only be used for qualified educational expenses. I called my sister to confirm the transfer, and she was effusive in her gratitude. She promised my nephew would make me proud, that this investment would pay dividends in family relationships for years to come. She even suggested we make it a regular thing. Maybe I could help with graduate school down the line. The conversation left me feeling simultaneously generous and manipulated. 2 weeks later, my world shifted. I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break when I stumbled across my nephew's TikTok account. The bio hit me like a freight train. Full-time content creator and influencer. College dropout living the dream. The account had thousands of followers watching him dance to trending songs and lip-sync to popular audio clips. My first reaction was disbelief. Maybe it was a joke, some kind of ironic humor I didn't understand. But as I scrolled through his recent posts, the timeline became clear. He dropped out of college just days after I'd transferred the money. The timing wasn't coincidental, it was calculated. The videos showed him in his bedroom, which had been transformed into a makeshift studio with ring lights and backdrop screens. He'd clearly invested in equipment, probably using money that should have gone toward textbooks and tuition. One video showed him unboxing expensive camera gear, talking about his new career path and how excited he was to be following his passion. I felt sick, not just because of the money, but because of how thoroughly I'd been played. My sister had known. She had to have known. The timing was too perfect, the setup too elaborate for this to be a spontaneous decision. They'd used my childlessness as emotional leverage to fund what was essentially an expensive hobby. I called my sister immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. When she answered, I could hear the defensiveness in her voice before I'd even explained why I was calling. She tried to downplay the situation, saying it was just a temporary break from school, that he'd go back eventually. She insisted he was just exploring his options, that lots of kids took gap years these days. But her explanations felt hollow and rehearsed. When I pressed her about the timing, she became evasive. She couldn't explain why my nephew had waited until after receiving the education fund to make this life-changing decision. She couldn't justify why neither of them had mentioned his doubts about college during our previous conversations. The more we talked, the clearer it became that this had been planned. My nephew hadn't suddenly discovered his passion for social media content. He'd been building his following for months. The graduation party conversation hadn't been about securing his education. It had been about funding his exit strategy. I hung up feeling betrayed and furious. But beneath the anger was something else, determination. They'd played me perfectly, but the game wasn't over yet. I spent the next day researching the legal aspects of the education fund. The bank representative confirmed what I'd hoped. Since the funds hadn't been used for qualified educational expenses and the beneficiary was no longer enrolled in school, I could reclaim the money. The process would take a few days, but it was entirely within my rights. I didn't tell my sister about my plans. Instead, I initiated the transfer back to my personal account and waited. The money would be gone from my nephew's account before he even realized what was happening. While I waited for the transfer to complete, I crafted my message carefully. I wanted it to be clear and final, without being unnecessarily cruel. After several drafts, I settled on something simple. Good luck monetizing your dance videos. The message was perfect in its brevity. It acknowledged his new career choice, while making it clear that I wouldn't be funding it. There was no anger in the words, no lengthy explanation or guilt trip. Just a simple statement that said everything it needed to say. I sent the message on a Friday afternoon, timing it so he'd see it over the weekend when he'd have time to process the implications. Then I turned off my phone and went for a long drive, needing space to think about what had just happened. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and explosive. My phone had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages when I finally turned it back on Sunday evening. My sister was furious, accusing me of being petty and vindictive. She claimed I was punishing my nephew for following his dreams, that I was being unsupportive of his entrepreneurial spirit. But her anger revealed the truth she'd been hiding. In her rage, she admitted they'd planned this from the beginning. My nephew had been wanting to drop out for months, but they'd needed financial security before he could take the leap. The graduation party conversation hadn't been about education at all. It had been about securing startup capital for his influencer career. She tried to guilt me by bringing up family loyalty and my obligations as an uncle. She reminded me that I had no children of my own to worry about. So why couldn't I support my nephew's dreams, even if they weren't traditional? She painted me as the villain in a story where I was clearly the victim. My nephew sent his own messages, alternating between apologies and accusations. He claimed he'd been planning to pay me back once his social media career took off, that this was just a temporary pivot. He insisted he could make real money as an influencer. That college was outdated anyway. His messages revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both business and family relationships. The rest of the family began choosing sides. Some relatives supported my decision, saying I'd been manipulated and had every right to reclaim my money. Others thought I was being harsh, that I should have given my nephew a chance to explain himself before taking such drastic action. My parents called to mediate, suggesting we all sit down and work something out. They proposed a compromise where I'd fund my nephew's influencer equipment and marketing efforts instead of his education. The suggestion showed how little they understood what had really happened. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about trust and respect. I declined their mediation offer. The situation was already resolved as far as I was concerned. I'd made a conditional gift based on specific circumstances. Those circumstances had changed, so I'd adjusted accordingly. There was nothing left to negotiate. Update 2. 3 months later, the family drama had mostly settled into a cold war. My sister and I weren't speaking, which was actually a relief. My nephew's influencer career was struggling. Turns out dancing in your bedroom doesn't automatically translate to sustainable income. His follower count had plateaued, and his engagement rates were dropping. I heard through family gossip that he'd started looking into returning to college, but the timing was problematic. He'd missed enrollment deadlines and would have to wait until the following semester. More importantly, he'd burned bridges with the financial aid office by dropping out so abruptly after accepting aid packages. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to secure easy money for his social media dreams, he'd actually made his path back to education more difficult and expensive. If he'd been honest from the beginning, we could have discussed alternatives. Instead, his deception had created consequences that extended far beyond our family relationship. I used the reclaimed money to fund a scholarship at my local community college. The scholarship was specifically for students from single-parent households who were pursuing practical degrees in trades or technology. I named it after my late grandmother, who'd always believed in honest work and keeping your word. The scholarship felt like the right way to honor my original intention of supporting education while ensuring the money went to students who truly valued the opportunity. The college was grateful for the donation, and I received regular updates about the scholarship recipients and their progress. My sister found out about the scholarship through social media. The college had posted about it on their website. She was furious that I'd given away money that should have gone to my nephew. She accused me of being spiteful and using charity to make a point. Her reaction confirmed that she still didn't understand the real issue. Update 3. A year later, my nephew reached out directly. His message was different from his earlier communications, more mature, more reflective. He admitted that dropping out had been a mistake, that he'd been caught up in social media fantasies about easy success. His influencer career had fizzled out completely, and he was working retail while trying to save money for college. He apologized for the deception and acknowledged that I had every right to reclaim the education fund. He didn't ask for money or try to justify his previous actions. Instead, he asked if we could rebuild our relationship independent of any financial considerations. The message felt genuine in a way his earlier communications hadn't. I agreed to meet him for coffee. The conversation was awkward at first, but his contrition seemed real. He'd learned hard lessons about the difference between dreams and realistic goals, about the value of education and the importance of honesty in family relationships. He was planning to start community college in the spring, funding it himself through work and student loans. We didn't discuss money at all during that first meeting. Instead, we talked about his experiences over the past year, the reality of trying to make money through social media, and his renewed appreciation for traditional education paths. He'd grown up considerably, though the lessons had come at a significant cost. I didn't offer to restore the education fund, and he didn't ask. That chapter was closed, and we both understood it. But I did offer something else, my time and advice as he navigated his return to school. Sometimes the most valuable support isn't financial. My sister and I remained estranged. She'd never apologized for her role in the deception, instead doubling down on her belief that I'd overreacted. Our relationship had been damaged beyond repair, not by the money itself, but by her willingness to manipulate family bonds for financial gain. The experience taught me important lessons about family dynamics and financial boundaries. Being childless doesn't make me a family ATM, and generosity shouldn't be weaponized through guilt and social pressure. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. My nephew's journey back to education was slower and more expensive than it needed to be, but it was also more meaningful. He'd learned to value opportunities instead of taking them for granted. The scholarship I'd established continued helping other students who understood the true worth of educational support. In the end, everyone got exactly what they'd chosen. My sister got the satisfaction of her manipulation tactics, at least temporarily. My nephew got his chance to pursue influencer fame and learned its realities firsthand. And I got clarity about family relationships and the importance of maintaining boundaries. The $50,000 had served its purpose after all, just not in the way anyone had originally planned. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones, and sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people live with the consequences of their own choices.